You wear a mask. I mean, we all do, right?
Absolutely. Every single day.
You curate your life, especially now, in an era where every single public-facing moment is filtered and edited and just perfectly lit.
Right. We use the perfect outfits to project success. We use these curated smiles to project happiness.
Yeah, and most importantly, we use all of these carefully constructed layers to hide, to cover up the exhaustion.
The anxiety, the fractured parts of your mind that you really just don't want the world to see.
Exactly. We project wholeness because brokenness makes people uncomfortable. But I want you, the listener, to imagine something for a second.
Okay.
Have you ever seen someone wear their own bleeding hands as a piece of jewelry?
That is a profoundly unsettling thought.
Right. Have you ever seen someone take the absolute most grotesque, agonizing parts of their physical destruction and wear them like a literal crown?
When we think of hiding our pain, we usually just sweep it under the rug. We certainly don't coat it in gold and put it on display.
No, we don't. But that is exactly what we are exploring today. In this deep dive, we are looking at a life where the line between absolute physical agony and high art was completely obliterated.
It's just a fascinating, almost terrifying reality to uncover.
It really is. So let me take you somewhere to set the scene. Close your eyes and picture Mexico City.
The year is 1934, right?
Yes, 1934. You are walking into the Palacio de Bellas Artes. It is this staggering Art Deco masterpiece.
Truly one of the most beautiful buildings in the world.
Oh, it's incredible. White marble columns, these sweeping theatrical staircases, beveled glass just reflecting the warm light everywhere.
There is even that magnificent multi-ton Tiffany glass curtain on the stage.
Right. The one depicting the volcanic guardian mountains of the Mexican Valley. So it is the absolute pinnacle of high society.
Yeah.
A monument to wealth and culture.
Exactly. So you are sitting in the auditorium, and the air is just thick with anticipation. You have the hum of the wealthy elite in their tailored European tuxedos, the silk evening gowns.
A live orchestra is playing in the pit, filling this massive acoustic space with a symphony.
And then a woman walks into the second-tier box.
It is the ultimate grand entrance, and the first thing you notice, well, it isn't her face, it's the sound.
The sound is deafening.
She is wearing this massive, sumptuous, heavy jewelry. Huge rings, cascading necklaces of pre-Columbian jade, thick silver bracelets.
And the clanking of the metal and the stone as she moves, it actually drowns out the music of the live orchestra.
Which is insane to think about. It is so disruptive, so intensely loud, that historical accounts show roughly 95% of the audience completely stops watching the stage.
95%. They physically shift their gaze.
Yeah, they crane their necks, looking up the second-tier box.
And when they look up, they are just mesmerized. They see these sweeping, vibrant Tijuana peasant skirts, the rustling petticoats, the intricate braids.
Woven with brightly colored wool, right?
Exactly. In a sea of muted European fashion, she looks like a resurrected deity. They honestly think they're looking at an Aztec goddess.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our topic today is that woman, the legendary artist, Frida Kahlo.
The one and only.
We have a massive stack of sources in front of us to help us understand what was actually happening in that theater. Historical accounts, cultural analyses by writers like Carlos Fuentes.
We have critical essays and, most importantly, the absolute core of our deep dive today.
Yes, a complete translation and facsimile of her deeply private, heavily guarded personal diary.
The diary she kept for the last 10 years of her life.
A period of unimaginable physical decline. So our mission for this deep dive is to shatter that myth of the Aztec goddess in the theater box.
You're going to open that private diary and look right behind the curtain of that grand entrance.
Because the tragic, counterintuitive reality is that she wasn't a deity at all. She was, as some historians have called her, a broken Cleopatra.
That is just the perfect way to phrase it, because those beautiful Tijuana dresses, the flowing fabric, the ribbons, they were not a fashion statement.
Not at all.
They were armor. They were the ultimate high-stakes camouflage.
If you look closely beneath the heavy fabric, those skirts were hiding a shriveled, withered leg.
They were hiding a shattered spine.
They were hiding a body that was quite literally encased in rigid, unforgiving orthopedic corsets made of leather, plaster, and steel.
The visual of the theater is a brilliant encapsulation of her entire existence, really. The pain was achieving the highest possible level of camouflage through extreme luxury.
Her physical body was utterly broken. essentially severed in half.
And what is so fascinating, and what we will see constantly reflected in her diary, is how this schism in her own flesh perfectly mirrored the historical schism of Mexico itself at that time.
Oh, that's a great point, because Mexico was a nation violently caught between its ancient indigenous earthbound traditions.
Right, and a rapid, mechanical, ruthless modernization. The Porfirio Diaz regime pushing order and progress while the peasant class was losing their land and starving.
It's like looking at a beautifully wrapped, incredibly expensive gift box, only to slowly realize that the ribbons are the only thing holding together a bomb that has already exploded.
Exactly. And we are going to explore how she documented this internal explosion.
We are going to look at how she literally spilled her own blood onto the pages of this journal. So let's go back to the beginning of the wreckage. Let's look at the absolute turning point of her existence.
We really have to go back to September 1925.
Yeah.
This is the moment that redefined her entirely.
Destiny didn't just crash into her. It completely annihilated her. She is 18 years old, riding a bus through the streets of Mexico City.
And we have to understand what a bus was back then. It wasn't a heavily reinforced metal vehicle like we have today.
Right, it was a pasita, a fragile, rickety box made of wood.
It was a remarkably frail vessel navigating a city that was rapidly, aggressively industrializing.
And then a modern, heavy, iron electric streetcar slams directly into the side of the wooden bus.
The collision is horrific.
It doesn't just bump the bus. It crushes the wood to splinters. It crushes the people inside.
The physical mechanics of the trauma she endured are, well, they are difficult to even describe. When the streetcar crushed the bus, a heavy iron handrail, the kind passengers hold onto, snapped off.
Oh, man.
It pierced her body like a sword. It entered her left side, tore entirely through her abdominal cavity, and exited through her pelvis.
Her collarbone snaps. Her ribs shatter. Her right leg, which crucially was already withered and weakened by a childhood bout of polio, suffers 11 distinct separate fractures.
11 fractures in one leg. Her right foot is entirely crushed. Her shoulder is dislocated permanently.
The violence of the impact was so extreme that it ripped her clothes completely off her body.
She was left entirely naked amidst the twisted metal, the splintered wood, and the bodies of the other passengers.
She is lying there, bleeding out in the wreckage, bare flesh pressed against shattered iron. But here is where the story pivots from a standard, tragic traffic accident into something that feels like a sickeningly poetic nightmare.
Because there was another passenger on that wooden bus, an artisan.
And this artisan was carrying a small packet of finely powdered gold.
When the streetcar hit, the impact caused the packet of gold dust to burst open.
The gold dust showers through the air, creating this glittering cloud inside the destroyed bus. And as it settles, it coats her bloody, naked, pierced body.
She was transformed instantly into a bleeding sacrifice wrapped in shimmering gold dust.
I remember reading this in the historical accounts and having to put the book down in absolute shock. It sounds completely fabricated.
It sounds like a morbid, surrealist fairy tale, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself, was this the universe attempting a brutal murder? Or was this the incredibly violent, fiery birth of a genius?
It is the ultimate founding mythology of an artist. And if I connect the specific horrifying moment to the bigger picture of her diary and her life's work, it is the perfect, enduring metaphor for everything she would ever create.
The terrible beauty.
Exactly. The pain coated in brilliance. The vibrant colors of her paintings masking the decay of her spine.
It really makes you think about how we all process our own damage. You, listening to this, you face trauma. We all experience pain, heartbreak, physical ailments.
But rarely is our trauma so literal, and rarely is it literally dusted in gold by a cosmic coincidence.
This single moment forged her. She was no longer just an 18-year-old girl going to school to study medicine.
No, she was a survivor marked by the universe, forever altered by the iron machine of the modern city breaking her human body.
And that break was not a one-time event that she healed from. The streetcar thrust her into a lifelong, inescapable sentence of medical torture.
The diary we are analyzing today is essentially the ledger of that torture.
Let's quantify that torture for a second, because we really need to understand the baseline of her daily existence before we can understand her art. Let us look at the mathematics of agony.
Okay, let's break down the numbers.
How many times can a human body be sliced open? In an era before advanced microsurgery, before modern pain management, how many times can you be put under the knife before the human mind simply snaps and completely dissociates from reality?
The sources and medical records are excruciatingly precise about this. She endured 32 distinct orthopedic and abdominal surgeries over the course of her life following the accident.
32. I mean, it's unfathomable.
It equated to 29 years of nonstop absolute physical agony. From the day of the crash in 1925 until the day she died in 1954, her body was a continuous battleground of decaying bone and surgical intervention.
The diary tracks her own destruction, and it does so with this relentless clinical precision.
You have to remember, she had already survived polio at age 6.
Right, that disease had caused her right leg to grow shorter and thinner than her left, which earned her the cruel schoolyard nickname, Peg Leg Frida.
She spent her childhood dealing with the taunting screams of other children.
But that isolation was nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the aftermath of the crash.
As we move into the 1940s, which is the period when she begins keeping this specific diary, her spinal column is actively collapsing. The vertebrae literally cannot support her weight.
To keep her upright, doctors force her to wear a series of orthopedic corsets. Not the fabric kind used for fashion, but rigid, suffocating medical devices.
Over the years, she wore plaster casts that had to be sawed off and remade, leather harnesses, and heavy steel cages bolted tightly around her torso.
8 different corsets in total.
Great.
Imagine living your entire adult life in a world that smells constantly of chloroform and surgical iodine. A world of tightly wound bandages, cold scalpels, and trophic ulcers rotting on your crushed foot.
She was, as one essayist beautifully and tragically describes her, a modern Saint Sebastian.
Oh, wow. If you know the classical paintings of Saint Sebastian, he is the martyr tied to a tree, pierced by dozens of arrows, bleeding, yet looking up toward heaven with a calm face.
That was her. And this relentless reality of physical destruction raises a profound, essential question about the very limits of human expression.
It does. There's a famous philosophy book by Lansbury called The Body in Pain. And the core thesis is that extreme physical pain actually destroys language.
Scary argues that true agony obliterates the dictionary, right?
Exactly. When you are in level 10, blinding pain, you don't form eloquent sentences. You're reduced to the primitive, pre-verbal cries of an animal. Pain isolates you entirely because it cannot be shared or truly described to someone else.
So looking at this diary, the massive question is, how does she keep communicating? When the pain was that absolute, how does she not just go silent?
Because she proved the philosophers wrong. She found a loophole in the destruction of language.
When the pain broke her words, she compensated by creating an entirely new vocabulary out of art. She bypassed the rational linguistic centers of the brain completely.
And the diary is the raw proof of that bypass. When you look at the facsimile pages, it's not a neat, orderly journal of daily events. You don't see entries like, today I went to the market.
No, it is an explosion of ink.
It is heavily reliant on a technique pioneered by the surrealists called psychic automatism.
The idea is to let your hand move across the paper without conscious, rational control. You don't plan the drawing. You let your subconscious, and in her case, her physical pain, draw itself.
Since words were failing her, she created a unique, hyper-specific color coding system. She actually wrote out a list in the diary, defining exactly what each color meant to her psychologically and physically.
Language failed, so color spoke. Let's look at some of those definitions because they are incredibly revealing. They aren't standard artistic color theories.
No, they are deeply visceral. Take magenta. She didn't just call it a dark pink.
She called it the color of the blood of the prickly pear cactus.
It's a color inextricably linked to the tough, thorny landscape of Mexico and the liquid inside it.
Yellow is another fascinating example. In Western art, yellow is often associated with the sun, joy, or warmth. But in her diary, yellow is explicitly defined as madness, sickness, mystery, and fear.
Brown was the color of mole, the deep, rich, complex chocolate and chili sauce native to Mexican cuisine. And it represented the earth, the soil she felt she was slowly returning to.
Green was warm, good light.
What she did here is a monumental act of defiance. She didn't just endure the pain in silence, she actively weaponized it.
She turned her bodily suffering into a tangible visual vocabulary. She painted the agony she could not scream.
But to truly understand how she developed this ability to look so unflinchingly at her own suffering, we have to look at the man who taught her how to see in the first place. We have to talk about her father.
Guillermo Kahlo. He is a pivotal figure in understanding her aesthetic approach to tragedy.
Guillermo was a German immigrant and a strict, highly disciplined 19th century photographer.
He was commissioned by the Mexican government to document the country's colonial architecture and churches, and he worked with large format glass plate cameras.
Which meant he had to document reality with a rigid, highly objective, incredibly clinical eye. Everything had to be perfectly framed, perfectly exposed, and entirely still.
She spent her childhood watching him work, helping him in the darkroom. She inherited that exact same lens.
But the genius of Frida Kahlo is that she completely subverted her father's technique. She took that cold, clinical, objective camera lens, and instead of pointing it at a stone church, she pointed it directly inward.
Into her own subjective nightmares and her own failing organs.
She applied an immense, almost punishing discipline to absolute messy chaos.
She painted her own bleeding, flayed skin. She painted her spine as a shattered classical column.
She painted herself literally cut in half on a hospital bed. But she painted these surreal horrors with the precise, hyper-realistic detail of a medical textbook illustration.
It's that clash that makes her art so arresting. The subject matter is a fever dream, but the technique is as cold as a surgeon's scalpel.
And she paired that clinical German eye with uniquely Mexican perspective on mortality. This is crucial for anyone trying to understand her diary.
Because in our modern Western world, death is the ultimate terror. It is the great unspoken taboo.
It is silent, it is final, and it is usually hidden away behind closed doors in sterile hospital rooms. We don't look at it.
But in her cultural world, death is not a stranger kept at arm's length.
Exactly. I mean, why does the Grim Reaper ride a bicycle and wear a fancy top hat in traditional Mexican folk art?
To understand that, we have to look at the cultural context of the death symbiosis in Mexico, which was heavily popularized by the printmaker José Guadalupe Posada.
Posada was a massively influential illustrator during the years leading up to the Mexican Revolution. He created these famous zinc lithographs of skeletons, calaveras, doing everyday things.
Posada's skeletons are drinking at the cantina, they are riding horses, they are dressed in upper-class European finery like the famous Calavera Catrina.
Posada used these skeletons to satirize the wealthy elite of the Porfirio Diaz regime, basically saying, underneath all those fancy French clothes, you are just a pile of bones, same as the poorest peasant.
And the diary draws heavily on this specific aesthetic. In this cultural framework, death isn't an ending to be feared, it's a neighbor, it's a member of the community.
It goes to the market, it drinks at the tavern.
Furthermore, in ancient indigenous Mexican mythology, the gods of life and the gods of death are often intertwined. The deity that brings the spring rain and the resurrection of crops is the exact same deity that inflicts festering wounds and blisters on his devotees.
Pain and joy are literally the same coin. You cannot have the harvest without the rot.
It's like she took that cultural philosophy and used dark comedy as a literal bulletproof vest.
That is the perfect analogy. She used joy as a weapon. She used relentless joking, dark sarcasm, and an explosive, defiant cheerfulness to protect her fragile internal state.
The historical accounts note that she had a very specific goal. She wanted to protect herself from what she called the bastards of Mexican intellectual life.
The art world of the 1930s and 40s was incredibly cannibalistic, filled with massive egos and political backstabbing. She refused to let them see her as a tragic, broken victim.
So instead of retreating, she became the loudest person in the room. She sang beautiful, bawdy Mexican folk songs in a perfect high falsetto.
She drank tequila with carpenters, shoemakers, and radical anarchists. She cursed like a sailor. She laughed directly, forcefully into the void.
The Reaper was coming for her, taking her piece by piece, surgery by surgery, and she looked him in the eye and mocked him.
But for all her bravado, for all her armor of dark humor, there was one force in her life that she did not mock. A force that bypassed all her defenses and consumed her just as entirely, and perhaps as painfully, as her physical ailments.
Diego
Rivera, the famous muralist, the absolute colossal titan of Mexican art at the time.
When most people look at the mythology of Frida Kahlo, they assume Diego was the monster. They cast him as the villain who destroyed her emotional life.
And it's easy to see why. I mean, he was physically massive. He was entirely outward-facing, blindly rampaging through the political and artistic world.
Pouring his immense energy entirely toward external public revelations.
And he was chronically, aggressively, shamelessly unfaithful. He slept with her own sister, Christina.
Which caused Frida unimaginable psychic pain that she famously said rivaled the bus crash itself.
Diego even admitted to his own cruelty later in life. He wrote in his autobiography, "The more I loved her, the more I wanted to hurt her."
It is a brutal, staggering confession of emotional abuse.
So we look at this from a modern perspective and we think, obviously, he is the parasite. He's the massive ego feeding off her tragedy and her loyalty.
But, and here is where the diary completely flips the narrative, if you open those pages, if you read her private letters to him, she didn't see it that way at all. Not even close.
She didn't see herself as the victim of a monster. She saw herself as the source of his power.
She wrote in the diary that she was the original cell, the primordial cell that literally gave birth to him.
They famously call themselves the elephant and the dove, the immense, heavy, lumbering beast and the fragile, crushed, delicate bird. But in the pages of this journal, she completely rewrites the chemistry of their love.
I use the word chemistry literally here because this blew my mind when I read the source material. She actually uses advanced, specific scientific terms from physical chemistry to describe their romantic and spiritual dynamic.
Keep in mind her early background. Before the crash, she was enrolled in the elite National Preparatory School, one of only a few dozen girls among hundreds of boys, and she was studying the natural sciences to become a doctor.
She understood biology and chemistry.
Right. So in the diary, she applies that science to Diego. She calls him the oxychrome.
The oxychrome. In the chemistry of dyes and colors, an oxychrome is a group of atoms attached to a molecule that modifies its ability to absorb light. Crucially, an oxychrome by itself does not produce color, that only captures the light.
She assigned this role to Diego.
And then she calls herself the chromophore.
The chromophore, the specific part of a molecule that actually emits the color, the part that absorbs certain wavelengths of visible light and transmits or reflects others to create the hue we see.
He captures, she emits.
Let's just sit with that for a second. To a modern ear, attuned to the language of therapy and boundaries, that sounds incredibly toxic.
It really does. She is stating scientifically that she provides the literal color, the literal substance and emotional vibration of his life, and his only role is to capture it, to consume it.
It completely defies every modern concept we have of a healthy, balanced relationship. It wasn't a partnership in the contemporary sense. It was raw, spiritual parasitism.
And the terrifying beauty of it is that she willingly, desperately played the host organism.
It was a total boundaryless fusion of identities.
Yeah.
She writes directly in the diary, I am him.
She writes, from the most primitive and ancient cells, at every moment he is my child born every moment, daily from myself.
She didn't want to just be his wife. Being a wife was too mundane, too conventional. She wanted to be his mother.
She wanted to be his universe. She wanted to be his creator.
There are famous paintings where she depicts herself holding Diego, this massive, hulking adult man, as a giant naked baby in her arms. She was willing to be drained, to be entirely consumed by him, because she truly believed she was the infinite cosmic well from which he was drinking.
It is either a terrifying delusion born of deep codependency, or it is an absolute, transcendent, emotional reality that most people simply cannot fathom.
But it raises a psychological question. This deep-seated urge to split herself, to create a dual reality where she is simultaneously the fragile, bedridden victim whose husband betrays her and the all-powerful, cosmic mother-creator of that same husband.
Where does that psychological mechanism come from?
To find the origin of the split self, we have to go backward in time. We have to go back before the 1925 bus crash, before she ever met the giant muralist.
We have to go back to her early childhood.
Imagine you are 6 years old. It is 1913. You contract the poliovirus. The virus attacks the anterior horn cells of your spinal cord, leading to muscle weakness and atrophy.
Your right leg is suddenly paralyzed. You are confined to your bedroom in your family home in Coyoacán. You cannot run outside.
You cannot play with the other children in the street. You are quarantined with your own pain.
The physical body is caged. And when a child's physical body is caged by trauma, the mind must find a way out.
The diary contains a specific memory from this exact period. And it is incredibly chilling to read. She describes being trapped in her room, looking out the window, facing Alenda's street, the street she cannot walk on.
She gets close to the glass and she breathes on the window pane to fog it up.
And with her tiny finger, she draws a door in the mist on the glass.
A secret door in the glass. What is hiding behind it?
She writes that in her mind, the moment she drew the door, she stepped through it. She stepped out of the bedroom and into an imaginary world where she met a friend.
She named this imaginary friend after a bird.
Pinzon.
Yes, Pinzon. She imagined herself falling rapidly through the center of the letter O in the friend's name, Pinzon, dropping deep down, rushing past the roots of trees, down to the bowels of the earth.
Down to the very center of the planet.
And there, deep underground, safe from the doctors and the braces and the virus, she meets this imaginary friend, a girl her own exact age.
She dances with her, she plays with her. In this subterranean world, she is completely free.
This isn't just a cute, whimsical childhood fantasy. From a modern psychological standpoint, we recognize this as a profound trauma response.
It is a textbook survival mechanism known as dissociation.
When the flesh fails, the mind fractures to protect itself.
Exactly. At age 6, the polio paralyzed her physically. To survive the immense psychological confinement of that paralysis, her mind literally split in two.
She created a decoy soul.
One little girl stays in the bed. That girl has to suffer the pain, endure the painful massages, wear the heavy braces, and deal with the terror of illness.
But the other girl escapes through the glass door to be free, to dance gracefully in the center of the earth where the virus can't reach her.
This childhood defense mechanism of compartmentalizing the self is the psychological bedrock of her entire life. It culminated years later in one of her most famous masterpieces, The Two Fridas.
The painting showing two identical women sitting side by side, their hearts completely exposed on their chests, their blood vessels physically connected by a surgical clamp.
The split identity, the decoy who suffers in the European dress, and the resilient core who survives in the Tijuana dress.
And when she grew older, as the surgeries mounted and the pain escalated, she didn't just split her mind, she literally split her veins onto the paper of her diary.
Which brings us to the physical reality of the diary itself. We must examine it not just as a text, but as an object.
Think about this. When you or I are writing in a notebook, and we accidentally knock over a pen and spill ink on the page, what do?
We consider it a mistake, we get annoyed, we might try to blot it out, or we just tear the page out entirely and start over.
For us, an ink spill is a ruin. It is a stain that disrupts the order of our thoughts.
But when she spilled ink in this diary, she didn't see a mistake. She saw her own veins erupting onto the paper.
The living stains. She didn't carefully plan the layouts of these pages. She would intentionally take a bottle of colored ink and spill it directly onto the fibrous paper.
He would then slam the book closed. She let the wet ink crush and soak entirely through the heavy paper, bleeding through to the other side.
She was utilizing that surrealist technique of automatic drawing we discussed earlier, but taking it to a visceral extreme. She would open the book, look at the chaotic, mirrored splotches of ink.
Much like a psychological Rorschach ink blot test.
Exactly, and she would stare into them until shapes began to appear.
She coaxed figures out of the chaos, and she explicitly, repeatedly connected the fluid of the ink to the fluid of her blood.
It is deeply unsettling. When you spend time looking at the facsimile pages of this diary, you realize she isn't writing a book in any traditional sense.
She is bleeding onto a page. She is giving birth to monsters, to memories, to fears, pulling them out of a puddle of black fluid.
The diary was not a retrospective record of her life. It was a literal real-time extension of her circulatory system.
And because it was an extension of her biology, there is zero hierarchy on these pages.
None whatsoever. A mundane grocery list sits right next to a profound cosmic revelation about the nature of the universe.
In these ink spills, the sacred and the incredibly ugly are mashed together without any boundaries.
You will see beautifully rendered ancient Aztec gods blurring directly into a horrific clinical sketch of her own rotting, gangrenous foot.
The vastness of the universe and the claustrophobic, horrific medical reality of her bedroom are seamless.
It is a pure stream of consciousness. It often lacks verbs, relying entirely on nouns and adjectives strung together. It is a visual and linguistic assault on the senses.
But within this absolute bleeding chaos, within the automatic monsters and the spilled ink, she desperately searched for a lifeline.
When her body was completely betraying her, she searched for an immutable logic.
Which leads us to one of the most fascinating themes in the diary, the mathematics of a collapsing body.
Picture the reality. Your spine is actively crumbling inside your flesh. Your right foot is turning black with gangrene. The pain is so severe you can barely sit upright in your wheelchair.
You don't turn to a god.
Religion and modern medicine had both completely failed her. 32 surgeries had failed her.
So what does? She opens the diary. Amidst the smeared ink, the chaotic colors, and the raw expressions of her deteriorating health, she takes a pen and she meticulously, carefully draws a perfect geometric triangle.
She invokes the ruthless ancient logic of the golden ratio.
The golden section, let me explain this for a second. The golden ratio, often denoted by the Greek letter phi, is an ancient mathematical concept where the ratio of a smaller segment to a larger segment is perfectly equal to the ratio of the larger segment to the whole.
It is considered the geometric law of perfect, unalterable harmony, found in the spirals of galaxies, the arrangement of leaves, and classical architecture.
She draws this perfectly proportioned triangle, and then she carefully draws eyes on the vertices of the shape.
Why math? Why geometry at the absolute height of biological failure?
Because math cannot mutate. Math cannot rot. When your flesh is in total painful anarchy, a geometric proof is the only thing in the universe that remains objectively true.
Exactly. She was trying to force her chaotic, decaying universe back into a harmonious shape. She was trying to command order into the void using the fundamental laws of geometry.
It is a desperate, absolutely brilliant act of intellectual rebellion. To hold up a perfectly proportioned, mathematically sound triangle against a body that is actively falling apart.
It's her saying, my body is chaos, but my mind still understands the divine proportion.
But despite her brilliant intellectual rebellions, the biological decay was inevitable.
It brings us to the year 1953, the absolute crisis point of her medical journey.
The trophic ulcers on her right foot, the foot that had been crushed in the bus crash almost 30 years prior, had worsened significantly. The circulation failed. Gangrene had fully set in.
The tissue was dead and necrotizing, posing a lethal threat to the rest of her body.
The doctors stand by your bed. They deliver the verdict. Your leg has to be sawed off, amputated below the knee.
It was the ultimate physical defeat. After 28 years of fighting to keep the body together, enduring dozens of spinal fusions and bone grafts just to remain whole, she was finally going to lose a major piece of it.
Imagine the sheer terror. Imagine the despair. You have fought your entire life against this exact outcome, and now the doctors are bringing out the bone saw.
But look at how she processes this in the diary.
She doesn't scream in terror on the page.
Yeah.
She doesn't write paragraphs of despair. She draws her severed leg. She draws it wrapped in sharp thorns.
And next to it, she writes something that is a massive, shocking slap in the face to death itself.
She writes, "In my entire figure there is only one, and I want two. For me to have two, they must cut one off."
It is a bizarre, surreal logic.
And then she writes the legendary line, the line that defines her resilience. "I have many wings. Cut them off, and to hell with it."
This is the absolute pinnacle of her mental alchemy.
Think about the psychological power required to do that. She completely reframes a brutal, clinical, surgical amputation as an act of physical liberation.
She essentially tells the doctors, fine, take the leg. I didn't need it anyway. I'm not a creature of the earth anymore. I am a creature of the sky.
I have wings. It is breathtaking arrogance. It is supreme power. She is looking at her own dismemberment and saying, "You cannot destroy me by taking my leg because I have already decided I am meant to fly."
She takes the ultimate loss of control and frames it as her own choice.
She entirely reverses the dynamic of victimization. She turns a horrific medical tragedy into a triumphant shedding of dead weight.
But the reality is, the wings of her imagination couldn't carry her forever. The physical pain continued to escalate after the amputation. The phantom limb pain was excruciating.
The rest of her body continued to fail.
Modern medicine was completely exhausted. There were no more surgeries to perform. Her psychological defenses, which had held up for 3 decades, were finally crumbling under the weight of the narcotics and the agony.
And this leads to a phase in her diary that surprises many people and frankly makes a lot of modern fans uncomfortable. It leads to her adopting the final painkiller. Extreme political dogma.
Now, we must approach this objectively. To a modern listener, seeing an icon of free expression suddenly painting portraits of totalitarian dictators is jarring.
Right, but psychologists who study her diary note that we shouldn't necessarily view this as a purely political awakening. We should view it as a psychological survival mechanism.
Right.
We are framing this as historical documentation of her mental state when medicine failed.
This was a fiercely independent, free-spirited, surrealist icon, a woman who defied every single rule of gender, art, and bourgeois society.
So why, in her final days, does she spend her fading energy painting stiff, reverent portraits of Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong?
Context is everything. In these final years, her physical agony was absolute. She was largely confined to a wheelchair or her bed. Heavy pain medication, including Demerol and morphine, severely clouded her mind.
If you look at the diary pages from this period, her normally precise, beautiful handwriting becomes shaky, loose, and uncontrolled.
The finesse is gone, and she begins filling the pages with aggressive political slogans. Huge, frantic block letters taking up entire pages.
Long live Stalin. Long live Mao. Marx, Engels. Lenin.
She replaces her own highly nuanced, deeply complex, spiritually fluid belief system with the absolute unbending black and white certainty of extreme communist ideology.
Let's jump to July 1954. It is 10 days before her death. She is effectively dying. She has severe pneumonia, she's exhausted, and she has a high fever.
But she forces her friends and nurses to push her in her wheelchair out into the streets of Mexico City in the rain.
She joins a massive public protest against the CIA's covert intervention in Guatemala, which had just overthrown the democratically elected president, Jacobo Arbenz.
The Cold War Iron Curtain was rapidly descending on Latin America, creating a geopolitically terrifying atmosphere.
The question is why? Why spend your very last struggling, painful breaths on a geopolitical protest? When you can barely sit up in your wheelchair, why are you holding a political placard?
Because she desperately needed a framework larger than her own pain.
Her own body had failed completely. Art, which had saved her for 30 years, was no longer enough to contain the sheer volume of the suffering.
Her complicated love with Diego was no longer enough.
When everything else dissolved into chaos, the rigid, absolute, unquestionable certainty of political dogma became her final orthopedic corset.
That is a staggering thought. The ideology was a plaster cast for her mind.
Just as the steel cages once held her shattered spine upright, the rigid rules of Marxism and Stalinism held her fractured psyche upright when she could no longer support herself.
It was her last spiritual refuge, a cause infinitely bigger than her failing flesh.
It gave her a concrete reason to look outside the confines of her sickbed. It allowed her to connect her isolated personal suffering to a massive narrative of global collective suffering.
But the corset couldn't stop the inevitable. We finally reached the end, the final pages of the diary.
The cultural narrative, the myth that the world likes to believe, is that her final, triumphant message to humanity was her vibrant still life painting titled Viva la Vida, Long Live Life.
The painting of bright green watermelons bursting with sweet red juice, a defiant roar of vitality in the face of death.
It makes a great poster. It makes a comfortable, inspiring myth for tote bags and coffee mugs.
But it isn't the whole truth. If you turn to the final page of her private diary, written in that shaky, exhausted hand just days before she passed, she wrote a vow.
A vow that strips away the myth and will make your blood run cold.
I hope the leaving is joyful, and I hope never to return.
Never to return.
It is the sound of absolute exhaustion. The pain had finally won the 30-year war of attrition. She was tired of fighting.
But we shouldn't view it simply as giving up. If you look at the final drawing surrounding those words, she isn't vanishing into a dark, empty void. She is returning to the first cell.
There is no isolation in her final vision.
Her body dissolves on the page. But it doesn't disappear. It becomes roots. It becomes plant stems, anal veins, the soil itself. She merges completely with the earth.
It is a vision of 100% interconnectedness, a pantheistic release where she is no longer trapped in a broken body, but distributed across the entire living universe.
She drops through that window pane one last time, past the imaginary friend Pinzon, down into the center of the earth, into the soil.
The mask of the Aztec goddess is finally permanently removed. The broken Cleopatra is allowed to rest.
So what does this all mean for you? You are listening to this right now, navigating a modern world. A world defined by digital filters, where we constantly, obsessively curate our lives.
We post the perfect photo from the perfect angle. We hide our exhaustion behind productivity hacks. We hide our mental fractures behind toxic positivity.
We hide our creeping daily disintegration because we're terrified of being seen as broken.
We all wear our modern versions of the Tijuana dress. We put on the heavy gold jewelry to distract everyone from our limp.
But Frida Kahlo didn't just hide. Yes, she wore the dress, but in the pages of this diary, she forced herself to look at the blood. She forced herself to look at the shattered bone, the gangrene, the rot underneath the gold dust.
She didn't just survive her horrific reality. She documented it. She smeared it on the page.
She stared directly into the void of her own destruction, and she drew a perfect geometric triangle over it.
She demands that we look at the reality of the human condition, the extreme fragility of the flesh and the terrifying resilience of the mind.
Are you brave enough to look at your own unedited reality? To look at the pain you try so incredibly hard to hide?
Or are you just going to keep polishing the mask?
Think about that the next time you see a perfect smile on your feed, and ask yourself what kind of corset is holding it up.